Energy. It is all around us, both seen and unseen. It affects all the lives within humanity, our great planet Earth, and the entire universe. It is a conscious cosmic matrix, an ever-evolving cycle, creating, breaking down, and recreating. This is Connected with your host, Andrea Dragonfly. Andrea tells us that energy is the foundation of our human experience, intrinsically affecting every facet of our lives, our perceptions, choices, and actions, as well as the challenges, opportunities, and people we attract. So now, please welcome the host of Connected, Andrea Dragonfly.
Hey there, welcome. I'm Andrea Dragonfly. I'm your host, and this is the show Connected. And we're going to jump into a very interesting conversation this show, and it's definitely one of those conversations that I think is really important that we get it out into the world that these things do exist because a lot of people are sitting on the fence about energy and about, some of this little bit of a darker energy that works us. And by all means, I honor where everybody is on their journey, where everybody's consciousness, what they're connected to, their awareness and where they are on the journey around this. And so what I'm excited about is I'm bringing information forward, which this is an area that I've had a lot of study in the last decade, and it's really kind of become part of my main service when I do energy work, is because we are living in a energy experience. Right? Everything. We talk about seen and unseen energy, right? And for the very first half of the season, because we're about halfway through the show's season, that I've been talking about us. I've been talking about our own individual experience, about how energy works within us, and about how when we're kind of connecting in with other people, how the energy dynamic can be between us. We've certainly talked most of summertime about karma. And karma, there's still more about karma because karma in its own it's an energy force. Many times people think of karma just as something that somebody's going to get if they do something bad, like, oh, they're going to get their karma, right? Well, it's so much more. It does include that on a certain level, but the karma is so much more than that because karma is really about bringing us forward, evolving us, bringing us into balance, letting us learn from our experiences, actually bringing us to these experiences to learn how we can empower ourselves or learn how we feel when we're disempowered and going through karmic loops over and over and over again. So we've been talking a lot about that over the last several weeks, a couple months now, right? And we're moving into a new season. So it's kind of like karma was the theme for summer. And now we're moving into this theme of kind of connecting into unseen energy. And again, with unseen energy, we have the dual nature of what we could call the good and the bad. We can call the dark and the light. We can call the malevolent, which would be connected to the dark, mal. And we can call the benevolent, which is connected to the light. And so we're going to begin a journey of deepening our consciousness, expanding our consciousness, deepening our awareness. That's really what I say there, into understanding these energies, because they're also conscious energies. And I do want to start by saying that energy at the beginning, all energy starts off as neutral. And it's only when we actually work with an energy that we can actually create something with that energy. So we can create it to be helpful and beneficial, or we can create it to be unhelpful and kind of more destructive, not so beneficial, right? Now, of course, there are these beings, and there are energy beings, and they come in many different forms. So there are and they're based on if we want to talk about hierarchical energy. And so you have just like a little bit, and I'm sorry, I'm lacking the word at the moment, but hopefully it comes to me. But again, it's all about like the different levels of energy, right? And so there's different energy beings that come with different energies. And we're going to be talking about one specifically, or we're going to be talking about an area with, because we're going to be talking about curses today. And so within this conversation, we're going to be opening the conversation, and I'm going to be talking more about this, and I'll certainly have my language all pulled together, so that as I begin having these deeper conversations about these energy beings, we get to understand. We get to understand, why do they exist? What is it all about? And it's quite a fascinating journey of discovery, and it's certainly one for me. I hope that maybe you might find it fascinating for yourself. And I also know that it can invoke a lot of fear, because especially when we come into like dark energies and evil energies and things like that, many people don't want to believe that that's true, and they believe that if they kind of acknowledge it or believe that yes, that exists and that's true, then somehow it might come and attack them, and that's not true, right? So but oftentimes, as part of our human experience, what we really are invited to do is just kind of like be with the fact that these things exist. And we don't have to put any energy towards the dark energies or anything like that. However, part of us, as we're coming into this new kind of consciousness, our consciousness is being expanded and elevated, is that we have to understand that it exists. And we have to understand also how it's operating, because it's actually permeated throughout our world, throughout all cultures, right? And also throughout all these different aspects of it all. And we're going to really go into that in a much deeper level. But we're going to be looking at the good and the bad together, because actually we're looking at balance. We're looking at, how do we work through these energies, and how do we even make relationships with the good allies and energies that we can actually have protecting us. And when we start to connect to them, we can build these relationships with them. And everybody knows about guardian angels and things like that, but many people don't necessarily know if they're true. So this is an invitation. And again, everything I bring to you is an invitation to try it on, is to work with it, play with it, and explore it, because I'm only bringing like tastes of the connection. I'm bringing these connection points, and there's so much more behind everything that I'm talking about. I'm just like scratching the surface when I talk about some of this, and it's an encouragement, invitation to take this further, and however you want to look at that, if it's different kinds of courses or classes you want to get yourself involved, if it's different types of things you want to research on, all the different places to research, whether that's online or, other places that you have access to. And it's really about that invitation of, I'm bringing forward some information that exists in the world. And based on our level of awareness, our level of consciousness, we may either be connected to it, or we may be saying like, no, that's not for me. And that's okay, because no matter where you are is exactly where you need to be. And sometimes this bit of information is here to expand. And again, I say this often, but it's also here to try on, let it inform you. Let it begin to show it where there might be some truth in it for you, right? And of course, if we start to look at dark energy, we start to look at evil and things like that, there's so many different ways of looking at this. So even as I dive into this conversation tonight, looking at lineage karma and how it's different yet sometimes confused with lineage curses, and more people are kind of connected to like, oh, I think my family has a curse, but they say it jokingly. They don't really truly believe that. But they're just kind of playful with it. And then of course there are those people who do believe that. So I don't want to say everybody lives in that category, because there's so many differences there, right? And so bringing the conversation forward is really recognizing that we all come from different belief systems, and really it's based on our experience. If we are directly experiencing this, then we're going to have a completely different relationship with it than somebody who has nothing like this within their family lineage, their environment. And so they're going to be more disconnected to that because there is no resonance, there's no connection, or maybe there's curiosity, right? And so all of that is, again, kind of the foundation of bringing this information forward. And so again, we've been talking about lineage karma for the last session was lineage karma. And then prior to that, we've been looking at our lineage relationship, our relationship with our family members, and even our ancestors in different generations. So just recapping some of that, we were looking at, I said last session, I'm sorry, I work with sessions often, it's last show. So excuse me there. But we've been looking at how we actually can have these experiences. A traumatic event can happen within our lives, and it can really have an altering experience as to how we then behave, how we are either, usually it creates a disconnection in some way, right? So I've used in the past, going to war, and the men that go off to war, and they're being exposed to some very intense horrors of our human experience, and watching friends and allies within that they were connected to, watching them get killed, also watching innocent people get killed, and also being asked to do certain things that maybe is in alignment with what they truly believe as who they are, but it's part of the bigger mission, right? And so there can be an extreme amount of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Now, back in World War I, World War II, and back in those days, that word wasn't even brought forth in psychology to even understand. It came after that became to be a connective understanding of how different people have experienced traumatic events, especially like if they were all within the military and having that experience. Now that experience, then they come home and they have a hard time functioning in society. They have, some PTSD, there's fear, there's, certain things that are going to actually kind of bring them into this place of, feeling like they might be regressing back in the war scene, right? And so sometimes it's hard for their bodies. And when I say bodies, I'm talking about their energy bodies, their physical, their emotional, their mental, their soul, their spirit bodies, because oftentimes in those places we can have what's called a soul loss. And the soul loss takes a piece of our power away. So we're disconnected from that, right? But it also can create these different types of behaviors. And that energy can actually begin to run through the familial line. If nobody has really actually, if that person, for example, grandpa, let's just use grandpa, great grandpa, however you want to use it. But even so, we still have war today. It could be your husband. It could be you yourself if you're watching this, right? There could have been a soul loss, and you can feel different in your behavior. And maybe there is this energy where, it's easier to isolate. It's easier to hold those feelings in. And over the generations, what ends up happening is some of these things, such as withdrawal of love, with the withdrawal, if I can get those words out of my mouth, of connection, of being able to share oneself. So what happens is there's this isolation, there's this withdrawal into oneself, that isolation, and then it can actually start to show up in other areas within the family, right? And so there's the withdrawal between the partners, grandmother and grandfather, husband and wife, however. And then there's also withdrawal between dad and son, dad and daughters, right? And this is just one example. So using this, and how trauma, if we're not working through it, and of course back in those days we didn't know how to work through it, we didn't have the consciousness yet. We were just at the effect of these things. And so we've been carrying them forward, but it can come down the lineage as well. It can create personality, uh, spikes, and I'm going to even use the word disorders and whatnot. There can be all sorts of different kinds of things that come up out of different kinds of trauma, right? I'm using this one as an example. Now, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. I'm going to get a glass of water so I can get my mouth fresh and ready to speak clearly. And then when we get back, we're going to dive into looking at the karma and looking at curses, how they differ, and then how we can actually start to identify how they look within the family line. So give me 2 minutes and I'll see you back here. Thank you.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them. Rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies. Find settings that allow them to be the most productive and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back. Thank you for your patience. I needed to freshen my palate so that I can speak more clearly. So, looking at lineage karma. Lineage karma is something that we experience one of our ancestors, and it can even be us creating karma for our future generations. But we experience something. And within our experience of that, we have, often a soul loss that disempowers us. And that disempowerment then in some way shows up within the lineage because they're also working that disempowerment as well. Now, something can happen to us. Somebody could wound us, hurt us, torture us, all sorts of things. But it's kind of like this direct energy that's happening that creates this karmic energetic force that's giving us the opportunity to work with it, heal it, understand it, and work with it that way. So when we're looking at karma, it's going to be coming from our ancestral, just kind of like living life. And having these energetics that follow. And it's not just grandpa at war or whomever. Grandma can have certain things. All of us. It's not even gender. If you're a human being, you can collect something that can shift the way that you behave. That behavior can be very disempowering for the family, and then it becomes part of the family's karma. So, for example, if, betrayal, we can have betrayal that has started somewhere in the back of the ancestry, and then how a person responds to betrayal can actually can be passed on to their children, and then their children, if that betrayal wound was never fully kind of like understood, healed, understood, worked with, and healed. So these are just ideas because there's so many different ones. Now, when we bring it to curses, curses is actually the extreme version of a karma, but it's not a karma per se. Now, this is where things get a little tangled. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my very best to try to clarify certain things. Because the karma is usually something that comes in based on our own action. Now, a curse comes in based on somebody else's action. But somebody else's action, not that they were the one that tortured you or brutally, violated you in some way. It's a magical attack. A curse is worked with on the magical level. Most people who are experiencing trauma are not experiencing it on a magical level. They're just experiencing it in the physical 3D world, right? This is what's happening. And so, yes, the world is filled with horrific things. People experience horrendous things in the world, but it's not necessarily being driven by somebody else with a magical intent to do harm. That's what a curse is. Now, I'm going to talk about how I see curses in the familial line, family line, way more than I see curses on individuals. And the reason for that is because if we look at history, that before we were these huge city centers, the city was much smaller. We lived more connected to the earth. And so even like the rural areas, so if we want to look back like 200 years ago, right? The cities were much different. We're even talking before the Industrial Revolution. Well, we're talking right around the Industrial Revolution, because that was happening into the 18th century. Let me see if I can get my words right. 1800s, the 19th century. So we're still looking at, so even if we go 300 years ago, because recently I just worked with a client and her family, and this lineage curse went back 12 generations. And so even within 12 generations, a generation can be anywhere between 20 and 25 years if you think about it, and that might even be generous in the earlier years, a couple hundred years ago, because people usually had babies and had started families, by the time they were 20, if we're looking at a couple hundred years ago, right? And it's only within now, in our current day, that many people aren't starting families until the later part of their 20s, 30s, and even into 40s now, right? So generations are shifting and changing over time. However, even if we were to just say a generation is like 25 years, and we talk 4 generations, we're talking 100 years. So we talk 12 generations, we're looking at 300 years. So we go back into what was happening. And so, of course, within energy, and especially as an energy healer, there's something about tracking and working through what many people could call the Akashic records, but we can track our energy lines. And it can be seen and known in different ways. And so the shamans of the Americas do it. Of course, there's the whole, Akashic records that are brought forth, and people can access that in different ways. And then, of course, there's all sorts of different ways throughout, this type of, European shamanism and whatnot that goes over in Eurasia even. And then there's also African, tribal relationships as well. And so every continent has their own way of doing it. So when we look at this, we can see that, what was happening 300 years ago. So this family in particular, I'm just going to use this as an example, because this family in particular, the lineage from this person was traced back to being a slave owners during the time of, early slavery. And so they had their plantation. And even within that plantation, of course, they were bringing slaves from Africa over against their will in horrible situations, right? And this is a reality. This is something we have to acknowledge. This is part of, what has happened in our past. And so these people, of course, they've come over against their will, separated from their tribes, their communities, even separated from their loved ones, their family, their spouses, their children, and then they've been put into slavery. And within that, what we know is that this one in particular, that I was working with within this client was, that the plantation owners were very horrible, very cruel, very um, all about power and control, and without like a connection to humanity, that these people are human, for Christ's sake. And so the family got cursed 12 generations ago by the slaves within their within their encampment. And so when we're looking at curses, we're looking at people who have a relationship to energy, a relationship to unseen energy even, right? And that curses can show up in different ways, but in this one in particular, they had worked with what's called the African tribal religion. It's also known as ATR. So an African tribal religion, but they have had their beings, their relationships, and they called forth this being to actually curse this family, and cursing this family in every one of their generations, therefore like carrying it forward. And how it has shown up over the generations is it's shown up very painfully with a lot of addiction. So drug addiction, alcohol addiction. There's a lot of violence, physical violence. There's even incest rape that's going on in the family as well. And so it's like, so when we see these very destructive patterns within the family line, usually because they're so destructive, that is a kind of a good idea that says, hey, there might be something going on with this family. This family may have a curse, right? Now, that's one example, because by all means, there are innumerable examples of how curses can work. This is one in particular. Now, if it's one person curses one person, it's a one-to-one curse. And it actually can certainly have a lot of power depending on the knowledge base of the person giving the curse. Now, even today, if a person is gifted with connection relationship and they try to do a curse and they're successful, they could be successful and they might have a natural given talent for connecting. However, it really depends on that person's awareness. And of course, anytime a person gives a curse, I mean, there are rules to working with energy, that whatever one puts out will come back to them, right? So we're talking about karma. We're talking about, actually having to balance the imbalance. So there's different types of people who know how to do different types of things. In our past, there's all sorts of different types of people who knew how to work with energy. It's only in our modern day that we've been so disconnected from our energy allies. I'm not saying that the dark energies and the evil, malevolent energies are our allies. No, they're not my ally. But I certainly have to know them and understand them, because I work with them regularly in my practice. But I also have to have that relationship with the good energies, the benevolent energies. Because whenever we're working with the darker energies, we have to have the light energies. I cannot do it as a human being. It's not even through me, but I'm a conduit. I'm an energy channeler. And so it's really working with these higher energy beings that can actually come and help the people who are under attack, right? So I can't say that it's all me. Of course, I play a part in all of that, but it's not necessarily all of me. If I'm going to go up against a very dark energy, that energy is going to look at me and laugh. But if I go up to that dark energy and I have a whole team of very powerful light energy behind me, that energy is not going to laugh at me anymore, right? So it's, again, if we think about it in respect to different kinds of, like, even just like armies, like if you are the queen or the king of your queendom, and you have all these energy beings, and each one of them represents a different aspect of your military force. This is how we build these big, beautiful teams. But we have to understand who are all these different beings, right? And so when we're working with curses, and curses can show up in many different ways, like I said. And so somebody who barely even knows what they're doing could put a curse on somebody. And that curse is going to show up in a way that it's going to affect a person's life. And it can, some curses can even actually take the life of another being. So, but it also depends on how well a person knows this information. So I'm not going to be talking a whole lot about that here, because that's not what we're doing here. But it's also important to know that these are how these things come into existence. So going back to the slave community, if one person did it one-to-one, it's much easier to work on a one-to-one curse than it is if you have a whole group of people, because there's layers. A curse can work in layers. A curse can be created that says, when this person does this, the energy will enact. It'll come forward and it'll start to create havoc in that person's life. But if the person's not doing that, then they can go back to a place of some sort of stasis where things are calm and things are going along fine. Some curses become almost like the snowball effect, where they start small and then they start to ramp up a little bit, and then they start to ramp up a little bit, and they start to ramp up a little bit. And then before you know, there a lot of really big, crazy things are happening within the family, within that person, but it can also be happening within the family. Now, usually a lineage curse means that anybody from the bloodline, even if you're like given up for adoption and you've been adopted out and you've been placed in another family, you still have that bloodline in you. And so some people, and by all means, we're talking about, there's so many different people on the planet. So I'm only talking about specific situations, right? Scenarios. But sometimes even that adopted child gets placed into another family, and then they're still living out some of that energy curse, and they don't even know, because they don't know who their family was, right? But sometimes that can be a lot. So something that might happen within that is that child might do some self-harm. They might start cutting. They might start doing things and acting out and acting as almost if there is something like possessing the child, right? And so, and that's on an extreme level. Sometimes it can also be just very unusual, right? It can also be like, oh my God, this is a small child, but this child has got this piercing energy and it's piercing through me and it doesn't feel right. So sometimes we just have to recognize these things. And so this is how we're going to talk about within children. But we can look at it throughout the family. So even so, and if we talk about 12 generations ago and through the bloodline, then we're also looking at the family tree that is huge, right? 12 generations. And maybe, of course, not everybody had children, or, maybe some people died before they had children within the family lineage. But we're talking about how that family, could be many different, at 12 generations back, you could have, easily 20 different families from that blood lineage all across the world, even, but still part of that blood lineage. And they could all be experiencing and continuing the curse as each new generation marries and brings in another person. And because it's in the energy of the bloodline. Now, we are going to take another quick break. I am definitely going to have another glass of water here. And when we get back, we're going to dive even further into that so it can make it as clear as possible. And again, this is a show that you're welcome to call in. There's the number at the bottom of the screen. If you're on Facebook or whatnot, you can go ahead and type any questions in the comment section, because this is a really big conversation. And it's also a conversation that we're only going to be able to scratch the surface on. And there's so many different scenarios. So as I talk about a few, think about oh my goodness, this can look so many different ways. And we'll talk about more of that when we get back. So I'll see you back here in 2. Thanks.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. You know, it feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. Okay. So, talking about curses, right? So, getting back to how curses are created. And if it's a person who doesn't really know so much about what they're doing, they can certainly put a curse on somebody, and that person can experience the effect of that curse. And they could then certainly seek out somebody who has skills in these types of things, like myself and many other people like myself out in the world, right? And these are actually things that we can work with to some degree, because that person wasn't even like knowing what they were possibly doing in the first place. So these are kind of like easier curses to actually remove. However, there are many, as I was saying, different ways that this can be done. And there's many different people with all sorts of different levels of skill. And so when we get into curses that are put onto people through multiple, like a setting, it can be even, there's all sorts of different types of groups out there in the world that seek power, control, manipulation, revenge, right? And so there can be certain types of curses that they do to attack others for power and control. There are many, so a lot of this is about understanding the spiritual energies. There's all sorts of different groups, but when we put, and I'm not going to put I'm not going to include myself in that, but when people put a curse on somebody else, I talked about how there's that energy of what we put out there comes back to us. And of course, even within Wicca and whatnot, they know that things will come back to us tenfold, right? So be careful of what a person does magically. This is where a lot of this gets really murky, especially in the way that people see this information, especially even within the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And I don't know a whole lot about Islam or Judaism as much, but I know a lot about Christianity. And then this is some of those things that are very dark and very, very evil. And yes, they absolutely can be, because they're about destruction. They're about trying to take away free will, the choice, any form of peace, ease, and flow, happiness in a person's life. They're doing it in an intention, but usually it starts off with one of the ancestors. So we're talking again about lineage curses. One of the ancestors or the family at the time, right, who was responsible for a great amount of harm to many, were the targets. And within that, the curse, in some way was that they will reap what they've given in different ways through every member of their lineage from that moment on. Now, in order for us to clear a lineage curse, we have to become aware of it first. We have to recognize that, hey, there's something happening, and that it's been like this through all these generations, and that any one of these people can get a break, and everybody has got something that's been happening in one way or another that has to do with disempowerment on a very kind of steep degree, right? And so even as an energy practitioner looking at this and looking at what the options are, it's like when a person becomes aware that this is happening within their family lineage and even with themselves, is that there has to be a choice that says, yeah, no more. I don't want this anymore. And so this is the first kind of choice coming into a person's healing, a person's moving forward out of that disempowered stuckness into their greater healing. And so usually they'll go seek support. They're going to seek an energy healer. They're going to maybe start with a therapist, who knows, but they're going to seek someone that they're going to be able to say, hey, this has been going on and I'm tired of it. I want to change something here. They want the change. Usually I get some of these different clients, through different networks of people that come to me. And so it's, I'm looking at in particular, how far back does this go in the lineage? I can't necessarily work with everybody in the lineage. I can only work with the person that's ready to be done with it. Now, if the person, I'm going to back up a little bit. If this is going on for, let's just say 12 generations, the person I'm working with right now is the 12th generation. So they're removed from the initial action of their ancestor by 11 generations. They're still very much a part of it, but it's not through their actions that they are still very, it's not through their personal actions. So it's easier for me to remove them from the lineage curse than because they, from various reasons, because it's really like this, it's this energy curse that's just playing out over and over and over again, and probably indefinitely, right? Sometimes curses will have a very specific end time. There's all sorts of different things. And so even within that, let's see, I feel like I'm getting a message here, but I can't really see it all that well. So let me see. So even within that, there's always a great possibility. Now, there's only on a very rare occasion is it almost near impossible for that curse to be removed. If it's the person who actually is the very first person to receive the curse, they tend, usually if it's really a powerful curse, it's kind of like them having to right that relationship right then and there, having to kind of sort of work that out with the person who cursed them. The chances of that actually happening are slim because of the dynamic. But even in today's world, and this happens, we still have this in our world. It's really big in different types of communities. It's big in our South in the United States. It's big in, throughout Mexico, in Central and South America. It's, big in different areas as well, different places. It's still going on in Europe. It's still going on, in all sorts of different places. I don't know so much about Asia. And I know that there is still a lot of fear around it within Africa even. And so these things are happening. And we have to be careful, because if we're really doing somebody wrong, we can be targets. I mean, of course, African tribal religion, we hear voodoo, hoodoo. I mean, they're working with some very specific types of energy beings that these energy beings are just doing what they're told. They're just like sucking the life force out of somebody, or creating, obstacles, in all sorts of different ways, challenges, creating adversities for them in different ways. And so it just kind of it just flows. It's just flowing through the generations, and each person is experiencing it in their own way, right? And so their scenario is going to be very different. Now, we talked about lineage karma. If you were born into that karma, if you were born into that family that has that lineage karma and has a curse connected to it, you chose that. You chose it because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. A curse is giving us a very extreme experience to disempowerment. But we can also look at it, so we have to start becoming aware. Oh, my culture, my belief, my faith has only taught me this much, like this teensy little thing. But we have to recognize that there's so much more about energy that we can't even really conceive of, because we haven't been told or taught. But it's still very much there. It's still working. It's still working different people in different ways. And so, yes, so this is that invitation to look at yourself, look at your family, or look at somebody you might know. I mean, it could even be a friend and their family. It could even be, somebody It could even be your child's partner and their family, or, somebody else's partner's family, right? Like, there's people. We can even see this stuff on television, and, of course, stories, and, and shows and movies and things like that. But these are not conversations that we're talking about, because we're not actually introduced that this even exists. This is like, oh yeah, we hear about it here and there in some scary stories, but then we want to shut that off, right? We want to shut that out, because we don't want to acknowledge it. Because if we acknowledge it, then we might be inviting it to come to us, which is not the case here. So it's really about, how are we being? So we can clear these curses in specific ways. And I know I'm being very vague, because every curse is going to have its own very unique situation. It's like a puzzle. And they can even, with a curse, you can even put all sorts of different traps and entrapments on it that are going to happen this way or that way, and what it's specifically going to do, and all this kind of stuff. And so to try to clear each one of these out, the person who is there to help, a person like myself or somebody else who does this work, has to fine tooth through, let me see if I can get my words out, like comb through, like with a fine tooth comb, all of the different energetic pieces that are at play there, and having to rework those, unwind them in that person's energy field. There's many different things. And so, but the biggest thing is a recognition that each curse is its own unique thing. It's not like, here's a recipe for curses and they're all going to look this way. It's going to be like, here's a we're going to do this to the family with this intention, and it's going to have its very own unique way that it operates. And then being able to free oneself from that is going to be, is going to be unique in its own way as well. But usually what's happening is that we can, people like myself, I can actually help people who come to this on their own and says, I want to free myself from this family curse. I no longer want to be a part of it. And then if they have children under the age of, let's just say, before puberty, I can help them, and they can stand for their children, and we can free them and their children under puberty, based on the parent vouching for the child of the bloodline. I know if this might sound confusing, it might be a little confusing. But I can't save the whole family. I can only save the ones that are conscious of it, who are aware and are like, yeah, no, I'm done, right? I want to change my life. I want to get rid of this family curse. And I've had several of these family curses over the last couple of years even. And so they're fascinating. So when a person hits puberty, of course, the person has to come into free will. They have to come into saying, yeah, I don't want this for me either. It comes into consciousness. We have to come into acknowledging that it exists, right? And this is how we heal ourselves from it. And so again, the difference between karma and curses is that a curse is it's a magical attack called a curse in particular, because there's also magical attacks that are different, that is placed on a person or a person's family intentionally because of the bad or harmful behavior. Or sometimes that's not even that. Sometimes it could be out of jealousy and envy. It can be out of trying to get rid of the competition, So there's all sorts of reasons why people do it. I tend to see usually it's about bad behavior within the people that I've been working with, meaning like violent and, abusive behaviors. Now we're going to take that last break before the end of the show. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and you can text them. You can make that phone call even when we get back. We all have a little bit of time before we end. Yeah, we'll be back in 2. So I'll see you then.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so we're wrapping up our conversation around family curses versus family karma. Now, over the break, I did get a message about clarification. So I want to clarify, because I had used earlier the example of a World War II veteran, for example, right? Or somebody coming back from the armed forces and who had come back suffering a severe amount of PTSD. And that PTSD, through the witnessing of so much violence and killing and, what all that comes with the experience of war, had actually put that person into like a state of alcoholism or possibly drug use. But in this scenario, in this question, it was about alcoholism. And that then the alcoholism can then go through different generations, family generations, right? And so just even within the physical or abuse that came with alcoholism within the lineage line, is this karma or is this abuse or is this a curse, right? Now, generally in that scenario, that would be more karma. That would be more of the lineage karma, because it's one's own experience and one's own trauma that sort of led to certain types of behaviors that then brought in alcoholism. And then within alcoholism, usually there's fear, there's a loss of control, there could be the violence that comes in through that. And oftentimes, even within that place, those people don't even know that they've done that at the time that they're doing it. There's that rage that kind of comes in. And so it's more part of the human psyche that is completely raging in that space. And that is part of the human experience in some way, right? So that can be extreme cases of, somebody experiencing pain and suffering through PTSD, through war. Now, that, again, I'm saying is karma. Now, let's say that person in World War II was in Germany and was invading maybe they weren't in Germany, but they were somewhere in World War II, and they were in some sort of village, and they were actually, kind of wreaking havoc in that village, and they were possibly killing, innocent women and children even, so it's usually around protection. Or it's usually, who knows? I'm going to say majority of the time, it might be around protection. Again, it can be around envy. It can be why people put curses on other people, right? Like power, control, greed, manipulation. I have no idea. Like there's so many possibilities, right? But there could be, let's just say and again, you have to, kind of like excuse my lack of military terms, but there could be a unit. I'm going to use the word unit. I think that sounds good. In a village that maybe the village people cursed them because of fear. And in that curse, so they could possibly have gotten a curse while they were in the village. The likeliness of it, we can check it in the energy field. We can look to see if that is what's happening, because usually there's the difference between a curse that is creating an energetic within the family that may have some sort of relationship to an unseen force, an unseen being. Now, there's also other things that can happen through severe trauma, which are cracks in our energy fields. We can also pick up other types of attachments as well. It doesn't even have to come from somebody who's cursing somebody. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we move into the fall season. And by all means, no matter what, we are going to always kind of connect into the light. The light, no matter what, is what brings us forward, as our protector, as our protection. So even if we're going to be talking about the dark parts of nature and the unseen forces, and even the dark parts of humanity, we're always going to connect back into the light. And so I know that we just have a couple of minutes left. And so as we connect back into the light, and I'm going to say that we're going to carry this conversation forward. We're just beginning to move it forward. But I do invite everybody who is watching this just to connect into themselves, take a deep breath, and then know that we live in a world of light and darkness, and that there are these forces that are at play, and that we just want to protect ourselves, and we can just see white light around us and connecting into the white light. And so even as we talk about these types of things through the next weeks to come, I definitely want to bring us back to just knowing that we're connected. As long as we're connected to our higher self and to our good and to our love, our compassion, our forgiveness, we're going to learn how to connect even more into these great benevolent beings that are all around us as we further these conversations, so that we can really understand. Actually, when we have this conversation and we get towards the end, we can really see the world from a much different perspective. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with me this evening here. And I'm here in Lakewood, Colorado. And if you find any value in any of these conversations, this information that I'm putting out there, you can always give it a like. You can always follow me on Facebook and Instagram at connected.dragonfly. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is at Andrea Dragonfly. And I'm going to be posting more stuff there as well, because this is live through Bold Brave TV's Facebook, but I'm going to be bringing things over to my own YouTube channel because people have been asking, how do I find you? So that's happening. And then you can always reach out to me through these different sites, but also my website at www.andreadragonfly.com. So it is a pleasure. Thank you so much. And happy fall equinox, which is happening on Sunday. And as we move into this new season, we're going to have some really juicy conversations for you as we get going. So I hope to see you back here next week. Enjoy.
This has been Connected with your host, Andrea Dragonfly. Join Andrea each week on an extraordinary journey, exploring the consciousness of energy and how you are connected. Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.